So I just finished the Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity game, and I got a little bit of a bone to pick here. So when the game came out, it was originally advertised as the prequel to Breath of the Wild, but in reality, it's a complete alternate timeline of the events that you know and got attached to in the main game. And maybe that's a spoiler, but they're lying in the marketing material. And maybe I should have seen that coming with the differences on display, but let's just go over how this game was advertised and see if I'm crazy here.
I think you are now ready to hear what happened 100 years ago.
This game takes place 100 years before the events of The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Great Calamity that occurred 100 years prior was mentioned, but the actual event itself wasn't shown in full. In this game, you'll be able to experience the events of the Great Calamity.
Mr. Aonuma approached us saying, "I think it would be interesting to create a Warriors game telling the story of the Great Calamity. This became the only game that will let you experience the world 100 years prior to the events of The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild."
Okay, now let's look at the eShop page. The Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity game is the only way to see firsthand what happened 100 years ago. Now, they're partially right. Before you start the game, you see the Calamity happening, with Zelda holding Link on the battlefield, then Baby Guardian appears. He travels back in time to a more peaceful time of preparation before this Calamity. That's all the Breath of the Wild prequel you get in the entire game. From here on out, it's an alternate history, baby! Not alternate history as in something like Into the Spider-Verse, where characters end up in different places and different versions of their story. No, everything that follows is exactly the same, except with added characters and dialogue. The gameplay itself is pretty good. It's definitely a step up from Hyrule Warriors in terms of scope, presentation, and design. Not exactly a high bar to clear, but if Warriors gameplay doesn't make you want to eat rocks, this is a pretty fun time. The new gameplay mechanics like the Sheikah Slate really mix up the gameplay. I don't have much else to say about the gameplay other than that it kind of grinds to a halt toward the end of the game, but I'm mostly interested in looking into the story, so I'll be doing a summary and critique of it. And again, the root of this is that I was kind of sidelined here, where I was buying the game that they were describing to me as the only way to experience the Calamity story, and then they just don't tell that story. So if you're worried about spoilers, I mean, honestly, don't. There's nothing to spoil here. This is the most milquetoast story in a video game that you could possibly cook up. But you can click off the video if you must. As you'll see, however, there isn't just much to spoil it outside of just how truly weird the story is. It takes about 20 hours to see the story through, and while the gameplay was okay enough, I feel kind of ripped off in the aspect of having to, see the story through to the end. I probably would have quit earlier if it was just like, a game like Super Smash Bros. That doesn't really have a story. So let's talk about this. Let me send a little bit of groundwork first, though. Prequel stories are an awesome concept. You add more life and color to a story that's already been told. Star Wars has done this a lot with the well-received TV series like Clone Wars and the movie Rogue One. They're even a chance to patch up a plot hole in the original work, like why is there a big destroy this space station button on the Death Star. Alternate versions of stories are cool too. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse shows us off really well with the other version of Peter Parker who has had a rough go at the superhero life. The game opts into the hybrid approach, sticking so close to the source material that you don't learn anything new about the world, but then also diverting from that source material completely whenever something interesting or dramatic were to happen. So let's start at the beginning here. I had no idea this is an alternate timeline story until about halfway through the game. The game I experienced was interesting, seeing moments like Mipha's father making his daughter promise that she'd come back home safely, and knowing that wouldn't happen was a really powerful moment. Because we've all played Breath of the Wild, we know how the story is going to end. But this one, as you'll see, is a little different. So after Baby Guardian joins the party, he gets examined at an ancient lab. Here's where the game's version of Robbie, who is frankly the worst, he does Michael Jackson ad-libs for some reason. Guardian model! Boo! I'm sure it's supposed to be a funny contrast compared to the older form of Breath of the Wild, but he takes that dramatic, the apocalypse is coming tone of the game to a weird place. And then Purah makes her entrance.
Oh yeah! Check it!
Boo!
And she excitedly says,
Oh yeah!
before showing Zelda actual pictures of their home destroyed. Am I supposed to take this story seriously or not? I mean, I like fun games. I don't need a game to have a good story. Some of my favorite video games are the Donkey Kong Country series. And I mean, it's the war of bananas, but somehow that comes out with a little more suspense than this game. After recruiting Urbosa, we're treated to more exposition showing the Yiga clan is working for a dark, bad man. You remember Baby Guardian? Well, this guy has a bad Baby Guardian. The Calamity comes and the king helps Zelda escape at the cost of his own life. Oh, what a cool moment. I was curious how the king fell. When the champions are under siege and you're trying to save them, you realize that this is all a lie. You're not getting a Breath of the Wild prequel at all. You're getting a Breath of the Wild fanfiction. Now, I think we could all agree that there's a right way and a wrong way to subvert your expectations in a work of fiction. Outright lying in the marketing material is probably not the most narratively sound strategy, but I get from a gameplay perspective, they probably wanted to fill out the roster and there weren't as many characters to choose from. But that being said, this isn't what the game promised, and story-wise, it introduces plot holes. For instance, Baby Guardian is apparently omnipotent. Baby Guardian time travels from the moment that Zelda is unlocking her Triforce power as the Calamity is taking over Hyrule to the past, where this version of the characters are preparing for the big moment. So that's what we see in that opening cutscene. So how then does the Baby Guardian know that in another version of this story, Teba and the rest of the Diet Champions are up to the task? Would these characters even exist in the same way if the champions hadn't fallen in the first place? But I guess he's picking them from the bad future and bringing them into the good future. But, you know, who cares? Here's a 4-year-old that fights with a giant seal named Patricia, which honestly, I think the funny touches are good. I mean, this game neither embraces the silly side or the dramatic side and has no idea how to balance them. So that's good fun. So either I'm supposed to take this story seriously or not. If the game is supposed to be a fun romp through Breath of the Wild stuff that you don't take seriously, why go through all this trouble of hiring a bunch of voice actors to do melodramatic dialogue and manufactured British accents?
Never. This will not come to pass.
We then find out that Professor Snape can create more Ganons and creates 4 more to fight Link. And this is the moment where Zelda awakens her power in this version of the story to protect Link. Which in the original Breath of the Wild she kind of hated and had a lot of clashes with Link. She didn't really like him. Not going to explore that here. Just going to kind of keep it rolling with the classic. You know, they just like each other for whatever reason. Zelda later finds her father in the Great Plateau because no one dies in this game. Now, I will say here, there was a cool bit of character development for Zelda and her dad here. They kind of have a meeting of the minds of a mutual understanding from their different perspectives. And as a dad myself, I quite enjoyed this. This is the type of content that I thought I was going to get in the game, but this is really the only opportunity they have to add more depth to any of the characters. Also, the king is really fun to play as, so there's a bonus. At the climax, the characters meet Dark Magician, and oh man, he's got mean Baby Guardian with him. Now, we don't know where this thing came from. Why does it serve Dark Wizard Guy? Who is Dark Wizard Guy? Where did he come from? Is he from the same timeline? Did he corrupt a Baby Guardian? Oh, I realized after I beat the game that all of this story that is pretty integral to the plot is actually in the gallery section in their biographies that are 2 sentences long. So this guy was from a certain village, and he's resurrecting Calamity Ganon. Now, did he do that in the original story? Is he a character that we just hadn't heard about in the original Breath of the Wild? Did he resurrect Calamity Ganon, or does Calamity Ganon come back every few years? I mean, who knows? I think Calamity Ganon is just whatever it needs to be at the moment to make a video game. And again, I'm fine with that. But these guys kind of sold me on a story here, not just like a game. So yeah, that's fun and confusing. After we do some video game stuff, he gets absorbed into Baby Guardian and becomes Calamity Ganon. So the way that we find that bad Baby Guardian is created is that when good Baby Guardian jumps through time, Ganon's malice, which is just kind of like a currency in this universe, flies through the time portal and possesses the Baby Guardian that's in that time period, and that becomes evil and can control monsters, and it works for the guy, and when that combines with Aster, that's Calamity Ganon. Wait, who looks a little... Wait a second. Huh. Interesting. Now, in the epic finale, Zelda blocks a vicious purple goo attack from Calamity Knack, and Baby Guardian jumps into the blast and it self-destructs. It hurts Ganon? I don't really know.
None of this makes any sense.
So after the plot is settled, the last remaining screw from the Baby Guardian conveniently sends all the champions back to their time at the moment when the threat is over, and, it's a video game, I guess. The credits show a dramatic story of a small, omnipotent robot who sacrificed himself for some reason. But, they're going to bring the robot back, and here we are. Well, at least there was a fitting end to Suga. Wait, no, Suga's still here. What happened to him? Didn't he die? This wasn't the great Calamity story we were promised. This was a minor inconvenience at Hyrule Castle. When they showed off the idea for this game, I was thinking, wow, what an interesting way to tell a prequel story. And how fitting is a Zelda Warriors game to tell the Calamity story. There was so much potential to tell a different type of Zelda story. I think a big part of why Breath of the Wild had an interesting story in the first place was that for the first time in about 30 years, Link and Zelda failed. Their failure had consequences, and you slowly had to face all the people that you let down through that story. You have to go ask Mipha's dad for help after his daughter had already been lost to the cause, and the King's Council holds a grudge against Link for that reason. There's so much sorrow and regret in the King's attitude in the Great Plateau, and look, Breath of the Wild has plenty of problems in the storytelling department, but it really redefined what a Zelda story as well as a Zelda game could be. There were so many opportunities to enlighten us on why were the champions selected? Why does Rivali hate Link? Why does Mipha have a crush on Link? What's Zelda's mom like? Why is Urbosa committed to Zelda? Why did Link and Zelda not click initially? What causes Link to open up to Zelda? We're told in the regular Breath of the Wild game that he eventually tells her that he's tries to stay strong and silent so that he's focused on the mission, and that he's really kind of nervous about it. He's a bit of a glutton. Like, where were all these moments? And, the biggest question, how does Zelda figure out how to hold Ganon at bay for an entire century? Like that climax that you really only get a peek into in Breath of the Wild just isn't cleared up at all. Now, to be clear, I don't have any problems with alternate stories or timelines. I think it can be a really interesting way to see how things play out differently for each path. Fire Emblem Three Houses does a pretty cool job of this. They've done this in a lot of Western RPGs where you have choices in the story and different things happen in the ending based on that. But, instead they took the heart-wrenching story of Breath of the Wild that 20 million of us were invested in and traded it in for a milquetoast romp through Hyrule where everyone is friends and no one gets a boo-boo. Then someone in marketing realized that they're not going to sell as many copies with that story. If they're upfront and honest about it being an entirely separate story, some people are not going to buy. Like, I don't think anyone out there was asking the what-if scenarios. Like, what if Breath of the Wild happened, but everything went according to plan and Zelda got her powers in time to save everyone? I know this is a game and games don't need to have great stories, but they definitely can have great stories. Breath of the Wild is part of that proof. The way you slowly piece together what happened 100 years ago at your own pace is a really interesting storytelling device that can't be replicated in any other medium. And this could have been really kind of a breakthrough spin-off title where it doesn't necessarily redefine what you know about the source material, but it can add some color into it. You know, kind of like Star Wars Rogue One, which, you know, has plenty of its own problems, but at the end of the day, it gave some sort of explanation for what happened in episode 4, and you can still enjoy episode 4 apart from that. You can still enjoy Rogue One apart from episode 4, but like, they're complementary pieces of media that really fill in the blanks of your understanding of that world. And I didn't have super high expectations of the Zelda team telling the details of any story. I mean, honestly, this series has always been more interesting from the world building perspective. But they dodged it entirely, just capitalizing on the popularity of Breath of the Wild with another Hyrule Warriors game. Why did they need the Zelda producers to write the dialogue and the story of this? All they did was exactly what they did before, but with this wacky time travel, no one loses ending. Like, why did they need to do that? This game deserved better. The new gameplay elements are honestly just what the doctor ordered. These franchise warrior crossover games have honestly gotten pretty tired. But this one was a breath of fresh air in a lot of ways. The graphical style was a little bit different than what you would typically expect in this, and I think that, you know, the technical limitations of a warrior game blend nicely with how Breath of the Wild's visuals are kind of hazy and blurry. And I think that from the combat perspectives, having the stasis and the bombs and all that stuff is a fun mix-up on how that formula usually goes, where you just kind of wait for someone to attack, and then their meter appears, and then you just deplete the meter and you beat them. So, I mean, honestly, like I quite enjoyed the game for the first couple chunks of it, but then when they started telling this goofy story and the game started getting repetitive with electric guardians and fire guardians and roasted guardians and boiled guardians, it was pretty good up until that point. A pretty good game. But man, that story, stinky.